وما لهم ألا يعذبهم الله وهم يصدون عن المسجد الحرام وما كانوا أولياءه إن أولياؤه إلا المتقون ولكن أكثرهم لا يعلمون.
But what prevents Allah from chastising them now when they are hindering people from the holy mosque, even though they are not even its true guardians? For its true guardians are none but the God-fearing, though most of them do not know that.
وما كان صلاتهم عند البيت إلا مكاء وتصدية فذوقوا العذاب بما كنتم تكفرون.
Their prayer at the house is nothing but whistling and hand-clapping. Taste then this chastisement for your denying the truth.
Their prayer at the house is nothing but whistling and hand-clapping.
This is to dispel a misconception common among the Arabs of those days. They were generally inclined to assume that since the Quraysh were the guardians and keepers of the Kaaba, and were also engaged in worship at that holy spot, they were recipients of God's special favors. Here, people are told that the de facto guardianship of the Kaaba should not be confused with its de jure guardianship. For only the God-fearing and pious are the rightful guardians of the Kaaba. As for the Quraysh, far from behaving in a manner becoming of the guardians of the Kaaba, they had virtually installed themselves as its masters, and were guilty of preventing people from worshipping there at will. This attitude blatantly betrayed their impiety and unrighteousness. As for their worship in the Kaaba, it was altogether devoid of religious devotion and sincerity. They neither turned earnestly to God, nor displayed any genuine submission or humility, nor engaged in worshipfully remembering Him. Their worship consisted of meaningless noise and clamor, of acts which seemed closer to play and jest than acts of religious devotion. How could such a guardianship of the Kaaba and such non-serious acts in the name of worship win God's favor for them, or secure for them immunity from God's scourge?
Taste, then, the chastisement for your denying the truth.
The Quraysh believe that God's punishment necessarily takes the form of some natural calamity or a rain of stones from the sky. They are, however, told that their decisive defeat in the Battle of Badr, which ensured the survival of Islam and spelled death for their much-cherished Jahiliyyah, was a form of God's punishment for them.
إن الذين كفروا ينفقون أموالهم ليصدوا عن سبيل الله فسينفقونها ثم تكون عليهم حسرة ثم يغلبون والذين كفروا إلى جهنم يحشرون.
Surely, those who deny the truth spend their wealth to hinder people from the way of Allah, and will continue to so spend until their efforts become a source of intense regret for them, and then they will be vanquished. And then these deniers of the truth will be driven to hell.
ليميز الله الخبيث من الطيب ويجعل الخبيث بعضه على بعض فيركمه جميعا فيجعله في جهنم أولئك هم الخاسرون.
So that Allah may separate the bad from the good, and join together all those who are bad into a pile one upon another, and cast them into hell. It is they who are the losers.
It is they who are the losers.
What can be more calamitous than a person's discovery at the end of the road that all the time, energy, ability, and the very quintessence of his life which he has devoted has driven him straight to his utter ruin, that his investments, far from yielding any interest or dividend, will require from him the payment of a grievous penalty instead?
قل للذين كفروا إن ينتهوا يغفر لهم ما قد سلف وإن يعودوا فقد مضت سنة الأولين.
O Prophet, tell the unbelievers that if they desist from evil, their past shall be forgiven, and if they revert to their past ways, then it is well known what happened with the people of the past.
وقاتلوهم حتى لا تكون فتنة ويكون الدين كله لله فإن انتهوا فإن الله بما يعملون بصير.
And fight against them until the mischief ends, and the way prescribed by Allah, the whole of it, prevails. Then if they give up mischief, surely Allah sees what they do.
The whole of it prevails.
This is a reiteration of the purpose mentioned earlier in Al-Baqarah 2:193, for which Muslims are required to wage war. The purpose is twofold. Negatively speaking, the purpose is to eradicate mischief. The positive purpose consists of establishing a state of affairs wherein all obedience is rendered to God alone. This alone is the purpose for which the believers may, rather should fight. Fighting for any other purpose is not lawful, nor does it behove men of faith to take part in wars for worldly purposes.
وَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ مَوْلَاكُمْ نِعْمَ الْمَوْلَى وَنِعْمَ النَّصِيرُ.
But if they turn away, then know well that Allah is your protector, an excellent protector, and an excellent helper.
وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ وللرسول ولذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل إن كنتم آمنتم بالله وما أنزلنا على عبدنا يوم الفرقان يوم التقى الجمعان والله على كل شيء قدير.
Know that 1/5 of the spoils that you obtain belongs to Allah, to the messenger, to the near of kin, to the orphans and the needy, and the wayfarer. This you must observe if you truly believe in Allah, and in what we sent down on our servant, on the day when the true was distinguished from the false, the day on which the two armies met in battle. Allah has power over all things.
And to the messenger, and to the near of kin, to the orphans and the needy, and the wayfarer.
This verse lays down the law for distributing the spoils of war. Spoils of war, as mentioned earlier, essentially belong to God and His messenger. They alone have the right to dispose of them. As for the soldiers who fight, they are not the rightful owners of the spoils. Whatever they do receive should be considered an extra reward from God rather than their legitimate right. Here it is stated how God and His messenger decided to dispose of the spoils. The prescribed rule is that the soldiers should deposit all the spoils with the ruler or the commander without making any effort to conceal anything. 1/5 of the spoils thus deposited would be assigned for the purposes mentioned in the present verse, and 4/5 would be distributed among the soldiers who had taken part in the fighting. In keeping with the directive contained in the present verse, after every battle, the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to proclaim, "These are your spoils. My own share in them is no more than 1/5, and even that 1/5 is spent on you. Bring everything, even if it be a piece of thread or a needle, or anything bigger or smaller, and take nothing by stealth," ghulul, for taking by stealth is a shameful deed and would lead to hell. It is pertinent to remember that the share of God and His Messenger, peace be upon him, in the spoils signifies that a part of the spoils should be earmarked for the struggle to exalt the word of God and to establish Islam as an operational system of life. As to the word kinsman in the verse, during the Prophet's lifetime, it stood for his relatives. Since the Prophet, peace be upon him, devoted all his time to the cause of Islam, he was not in a position to earn his own living. Hence, some arrangement had to be made for the maintenance of the Prophet, peace be upon him, as well as for his family and the relatives dependent upon him for financial support. Hence, a part of the khams, 1/5 of the spoils of war, was specified for that purpose. There is, however, some disagreement among jurists as to whom this share should go to after the Prophet's death. Some jurists are of the view that after the Prophet's death, the rule stands repealed. According to other jurists, this part should go to the relatives of those who succeeded him to the caliphate. Other jurists are of the view that this share should be distributed among the poor members of the Prophet's family. To the best of my knowledge, the rightly guided caliphs followed the last practice.
This you must observe if you truly believe in Allah and in what we sent down on our servant.
This refers to the support and help from God which brought about victory for the Muslims.
إذ أنتم بالعدوة الدنيا وهم بالعدوة القصوى والركب أسفل منكم ولو تواعدتم لاختلفتم في الميعاد ولكن ليقضي الله أمرا كان مفعولا ليهلك من هلك عن بينة ويحيى من حي عن بينة وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَسَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ.
And recall when you were encamped at the nearer end of the valley of Badr, and they were at the farther end, and the caravan below you along the seaside. Had you made a mutual appointment to meet an encounter, you would have declined. But encounter was brought about so that Allah might accomplish what He had decreed, and that he who was to perish should perish through a clear proof, and who was to survive might survive through a clear proof. Surely Allah is all-hearing, all-knowing.
And who was to survive might survive through a clear proof.
The living and the dead spoken of in the above verse do not signify the individuals who survived the battle, or those killed during it. The reference here is to the ideological entities of Islam and Jahiliyyah.
Surely, Allah is all-hearing, all-knowing.
God is neither blind nor deaf nor ignorant. On the contrary, He is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-wise. Hence, we find reflection of God's knowledge, wisdom, and justice in history.
إذ يريكهم الله في منامك قليلا ولو أراكهم كثيرا لفشلتم ولتنازعتم في الأمر ولكن الله سلم إنه عليم بذات الصدور.
And recall when Allah showed them to you in your dream to be few in number, and had He showed them to you to be numerous, you would have flagged and disagreed with one another about fighting them. But Allah saved you. Surely Allah knows what is hidden in the breasts.
And recall when Allah showed them to you in your dream to be few in number.
This refers to the time when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was leaving Medina along with the Muslims, or was on his way to Badr for the encounter with the Quraysh, and did not have any definite information about the strength of the enemy. In a dream, however, the Prophet, peace be upon him, had a vision of the enemy. On the basis of that vision, the Prophet, peace be upon him, estimated that the enemy was not too powerful. Later, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, narrated his dream to the Muslims, they were also encouraged and boldly went ahead to confront the enemy.
وَإِذْ يُرِيكُمُوهُمْ إِذِ الْتَقَيْتُمْ فِي أَعْيُنِكُمْ قَلِيلًا وَيُقَلِّلُكُمْ فِي أَعْيُنِهِمْ لِيَقْضِيَ اللَّهُ أَمْرًا كَانَ مَفْعُولًا وَإِلَى اللَّهِ تُرْجَعُ الْأُمُورُ.
And recall when he made them appear to be few in your eyes, when you met them in the battle, just as he lessened you in their eyes, so that Allah might accomplish what had been decreed. To Allah are all matters referred for decision.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا لقيتم فئة فاثبتوا واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون.
Believers, when you encounter a host in battle, stand firm and remember Allah much that you may triumph.
وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ وَاصْبِرُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ.
And obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not quarrel with one another, lest you should lose courage and your power depart. Be steadfast. Surely Allah is with those who remain steadfast. Be steadfast. Surely Allah is with those who remain steadfast.
The believers were asked to exercise self-restraint. They were required to refrain from haste, panic, consternation, greed, and uncalled for enthusiasm. They were counseled to proceed cool-headedly and to take well-considered decisions. They were also asked not to relent an inch even in the face of grave dangers, refrain from acting rashly under provocation, to desist from taking hasty action out of impatience. They were also asked to exercise control over themselves lest they were tempted by worldly gains. All these instructions are implicit in the Quranic directive of patience given to the Muslims. God extends all help and support to those who exercise patience, sabr, in the above sense.
ولا تكونوا كالذين خرجوا من ديارهم بطرا ورئاء الناس ويصدون عن سبيل الله والله بما يعملون محيط.
And be not like those who came forth from their homes exulting, with a desire to be seen of men, and hindering others from the way of Allah. Allah encompasses all that they do. With a desire to be seen of men, and hindering others from the way of Allah. This alludes to the army of the disbelieving Quraysh, which when it proceeded on a military expedition against the Muslims, was accompanied by singing and dancing minstrels. Whenever the army halted, dancing and drinking parties were held. Also, the army arrogantly vaunted its military power and numerical strength before the tribes and localities which fell on the way, and boasted of its invincibility. This much is about the moral state of the Quraysh army. What was even worse was the object of their fighting. They were not fighting for any lofty ideal. What they aimed at was merely to defeat the forces of truth and justice, to suppress and obliterate the only group which sought to uphold the truth. They simply did not want anyone to champion the cause of truth and justice. This occasion was considered appropriate to warn the Muslims not to let themselves degenerate into a group like the Quraysh. God had favored them with faith and devotion to the truth, and gratitude to God for this favor required that they should purify both their conduct and their reason for fighting. This directive was not meant just for the time in which it was revealed. It is equally applicable today, and will remain applicable in all times to come. The forces of unbelief today are no different from those in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, for the moral state of the present-day armies is no better than the armies in the past. Arrangements for prostitution and drinking are as much a part of the present-day armies of unbelievers as ever before. The soldiers in these armies feel no shame in openly demanding the maximum amount of alcoholic drinks and as many call girls as possible. Without any sense of shame, the soldiers virtually ask their compatriots to make available to them their daughters and sisters for the gratification of their lust. That being the case, how can one expect that the soldiers of today would not go about committing debauchery and polluting the life of the people in the lands which they happen to conquer? Apart from moral corruption, the soldiers of the present-day armies are known for their arrogance and effrontery to the conquered people. Their gestures and conversation, both of ordinary soldiers and officers, bespeak of their arrogance. Arrogance is also reflected in the statements made by the statesmen of the militarily strong and triumphant nations, who in effect boastfully say to their people, in the words of the Quran, "No one shall overcome you today." Al-Anfal 8:48. And challenging the whole world in their vainglory, "Who is greater than us in strength?" Fusilat 41:15. These powers are evidently wicked, but the purposes for which they wage war are even more so. These powers are keen out of sheer trickery to assure the rest of the world that in waging war they are prompted only by the welfare of mankind. In actual fact, they might have either one motive for waging war or another, but it is absolutely certain that the motive is not the welfare of mankind. Their purpose is to establish their exclusive control and to exploit the resources created by God for all mankind. Their goal is to reduce other nations to the position of hewers of wood and drawers of water, and to subject them to thraldom and servitude. Here, Muslims are being told, in effect, that they should eschew the ways of non-Muslims and desist from devoting their lives, energy, and resources to the evil purposes for which non-Muslims engage in warfare.
وَإِذْ زَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَعْمَالَهُمْ وَقَالَ لَا غَالِبَ لَكُمُ الْيَوْمَ مِنَ النَّاسِ وَإِنِّي جَارٌ لَكُمْ فَلَمَّا تَرَاءَتِ الْفِئَتَانِ نَكَصَ عَلَى عَقِبَيْهِ وَقَالَ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِّنكُمْ إِنِّي أَرَى مَا لَا تَرَوْنَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهَ وَاللَّهُ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ.
And recall when Satan made their works seem fair to them and said, "None shall overcome you today, and I am your supporter." But when the two armies faced each other, he turned on his heels and said, "Surely I am quit of you, for I behold that which you do not. Indeed, I fear Allah, and Allah is stern in punishment."
إذ يقول المنافقون والذين في قلوبهم مرض غر هؤلاء دينهم ومن يتوكل على الله فإن الله عزيز حكيم.
And recall when the hypocrites and those whose hearts were diseased said, "Their faith has deluded these believers. But he who puts his trust in Allah shall find Allah Almighty, All-Wise." Their faith has deluded these believers.
Observing that a small band of resourceless Muslims was getting ready to confront the powerful Quraysh, the hypocrites as well as those who were heedless of God and cared only for worldly interests often tended to say to one another that the religious passion of the Muslims had driven them to utter fanaticism and zealotry. They were sure that the Muslims would face a total rout on the battlefield. They were puzzled by how the Prophet, peace be upon him, in whom the Muslims believed, had cast such a spell over them that they were altogether incapable of rational calculation and were hence rushing straight into the very mouth of death.
ولو ترى إذ يتوفى الذين كفروا الملائكة يضربون وجوههم وأدبارهم وذوقوا عذاب الحريق.
And if you could only see when the angels took away the souls of the unbelievers, striking them on their faces and backs, saying, "Taste the torment of burning."
ذلك بما قدمت أيديكم وأن الله ليس بظلام للعبيد.
This is your punishment for what your hands have wrought. Allah is not unjust in the least to His creatures.